Alrighty, well, good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, I am Mitch Hescox, the President and CEO of the Evangelical Environmental Network. And today we're going to talk about something that's extremely important to me, and I believe anybody that cares about children and even life itself. And that's soot, or PM2.5. And what we're going to talk about today is that EPA just recently came out with a proposal to change the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for particulate matter 2.5, which literally that's soot. It means PM means particulate matter, and 2.5 means micron, or the diameter of the particles. This standard hasn't been changed for at least 10 years. I believe it was 2012 it came out. The last administration didn't do anything with it. So we're going to talk a little bit about why it's such a critical thing for pro-life Christians, evangelicals like us, to get involved in. And so for me, soot is the deadly air pollutant. And so Kim, if you could change slides, I would greatly appreciate it. Move it down. So we have a biblical requirement, and we could pick lots of scriptures, but I happen to love Psalm 22, to defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, to rescue the weary, the weak, and the needy. That is nowhere more true than dealing with PM2.5, is we're going to see that not only are unborn children impacted by it, those who live in poor income areas, near freeways, near manufacturing plants, near old coal-fired power plants, are subject to the most problems with PM2.5. And so we're going to get to that in just a second and talk more about it. So Kim, if you would advance the slide for me. Air pollution affects everyone, but there are inequalities. Certainly older people, pregnant women and their unborn child, people that live, as we just mentioned earlier, that are in economically poor areas, first-line children, and children. And one of the things that I learned a long time ago is to think about that. When it comes to pollution, children are not little adults. They are a creature in themselves. Their organs are developing, their brains are developing. They are much more susceptible to pollutants and toxins of every form than adults are, just because of who their bodies are. And so if we can go to the next slide. This is just some of the impacts that air pollution causes on people of different sizes. And we're not going to, it's a small slide, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it today. I'll be happy to send it to you. But I'd really like to go in and really start talking about PM2.5. And with that, if we could go to the next slide, Kim, and if you could bring up that video, I'd greatly appreciate it. We're going to watch just a short video on the impacts of PM2.5 in children.
The impact of air pollution on children's brain development and health. The small smoke particles from air pollution, or PM2.5, are more than 25 times smaller than the width of a human hair. As air is inhaled, particles enter the body through the nose and mouth. Air passes through the respiratory airway and finally reaches the alveoli, tiny air sacs in the deepest part of the lung. The smallest of the particles that enter the lungs diffuse through the walls of the alveoli into the bloodstream, where they are transported to all organs of the body, where they can affect normal function. Critical organs affected include the lungs, immune system, heart, and developing brain. The growth rate of the brain is highest around birth, but development continues throughout childhood and adolescence, playing an important role in a child's memory, attention span, emotional control, and social interaction. Once in a child's still developing brain, particulate matter damages brain cells. The result, impaired cognitive development and ability to learn that may have severe consequences for welfare and earning potential across the lifespan, and may accumulate, resulting in neurodegenerative disease later in life. In addition to harming the brain, exposure of the fetus to air pollution may increase the risk of other diseases across the lifespan, including stroke, pneumonia, ischemic heart disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, lung cancer. Protect your children from air pollution. Stay inside when air pollution is high. If you have to go out, wear a filtering mask. Install window filters and air filters at home if possible. Consume food and drinks high in vitamin C, E, and omega-3 antioxidants.
Okay, so back to folks to what is PM 2.5? You know, it's often called soot, but it's really only produced, or the vast majority of it is only produced by the burning of fossil fuels, high temperature processes, or other sort of really high temperature things. But I'd really like to stress to everybody today that it's more than just soot, just more than carbon black, more than dirt. It includes all sorts of chemicals from nitrates to sulfates, heavy metals, and it's chemicals that can last for a lifetime in a body. And it literally, if we can go to the next slide, Kim. One more, please. We'll just skip that one for right now. It's responsible for up to 200,000 deaths in the United States every year. And if we go to the next slide, it really is there's 9 different things that's interesting. You can see the death rates there. There are 9 different causes, everything from heart disease to brain problems, type 2 diabetes. And of course, because of what we just saw of the brain, of the PM 2.5 getting inside the brain, it's believed now to be one of the leading causes in older life of dementia-related diseases. But for us, and if we go to the next slide, one of the big tragedies of PM 2.5 is that, just as an example, 1 in 9 pregnancies in the United States result in preterm birth. In the African American community, that number doubles to 1 in 5. And the leading cause of preterm birth is intrauterine inflammation, and the leading cause of intrauterine inflammation is PM 2.5. And just an example, my friend Leo Trezendi a few years ago wrote a paper on the cost. So if we go to the next slide, it results in about 15,000 preterm births in the United States, and 35% of those births die. And just as a result of that, that's $4.3 million a year in the cost for all that weight and the value of life. And it really is preterm birth and lifts up that problems that we look at for just exacerbating birth among women, all women, but especially women of color. And so that's why we're concerned about it, is it's a real deadly thing. And Kim will go to the next slide. We'll talk quickly about what we're going to do. Currently, the EPA, 10 years ago, they did change it, have the yearly levels of PM 2.5 at 12.0 micrograms per meter. Again, that's just the number of weight. It's a weight volume of what it is. And with the PM 2.5, and then the yearly average is being, the instantaneous 24 hours is 35 micrograms. The yearly total exposure should be less than 12. And we'll keep going, Kim. And right now, they're only offering, there we go, thank you. They only want to go back and lower it, and they're actually asking for comments on a range from 9 to 10 micrograms per meter and keeping the 24-hour standard the same, which we think is wrong. In fact, it even goes against the recommendations of EPA's own science committee, and it's certainly against what most medical science says. So here we go, Kim. Next slide, please. Keep going, there we go. The World Health Organization really says that it should be 5 micrograms per meter and 15 total. So if you look at that, the current EPA standard that they're posing is roughly double the amount of what the World Health Organization says, which we believe for the United States is preposterous and should be a lot better. So going to the next slide. The EPA estimates in this proposal that 4,500 lives would be saved with a standard reduction of 9 micrograms per cubic meter. But one medical research paper estimates that 19,000 lives would be saved by just going to 8. So we're getting almost, well, it's 4 times as many lives saved by going to the 8, which is the standard we want. And in fact, another research paper reports, and they're all cited as PowerPoint, which I can send to you, is that for every 1 microgram per cubic meter, you save 12,000 lives. So if you go down to that and we'll put really the WHO standard, back up 1 slide per second, Ken, that would save 48,000 lives instead of the 4,500 that the EPA is talking about. So now we can go to the next slide. So we're trying to make a compromise. We think that the minimum national ambient air quality standard for particulate matter should be 8 micrograms per meter, and it's for the standard and 25 for the 24-hour period. And so with that, I think go one more slide, Kim. I'm going to turn this over to Kim, and she's going to talk about testifying and offer you and tell you about the resource pack that we have to do it, that explains all this stuff in detail. I've provided everyone the letter that I'm going to be using to testify for, which has all these informations on it, all the things that are here. So we're here to help you to do it. But what I wanted you to understand from my part of it is that PM2.5 is a deadly killer. Think about that. 200,000 lives per year is a good estimate of what happens in the United States.
Okay. Thank you, Mitch. On the day of testimony, just wanted to give you an idea of what to expect. First of all, it sounds pretty overwhelming. It is very exciting to testify before the EPA, but it is actually relatively easy once you get there and you come prepared. So you should receive a Zoom link a day or two before the hearing starts. So probably early next week, you'll get a Zoom link, and you can mark that on your calendar, and that's how you'll get into the hearings. In terms of when to show up, you've all been given you've selected like a 2-hour time slot, and a couple days before, I think at the same time that you get your Zoom link, they'll send a order of speakers on each of the days, and so that'll give you an idea of where you fall. But it's recommended that you show up 10 minutes or so before that hour time slot, just in case they're ahead of time, but then also know that within the 2 hours, you could show up anytime during that time period. And so it's good to be there and to know to expect to wait. And also it's a good idea to get there early because it gives you an idea of what it looks like, because you can get to see other people testify. They do publish the order of call or people that will be called ahead of time. But, they also typically in the chat will put here the next 2 speakers. So that gives you an idea of when you're going to be coming up. And then you'll speak before a panel of 3 or 4 people. Most of the time they don't ask questions. If they do ask a question, what they say is, that was an interesting study you shared about. Can you share the information? And everybody always follows up with, I'm going to submit my comments via written testimony, and the citations will be included in that. And they're always okay with that answer. And then afterwards, we do ask that you submit your testimony written, and we can help you with that if sometimes it can be a little clunky and cumbersome. So if you want to go ahead and send me your testimony either before or within a couple days after, I'm happy to go ahead and submit that for you as well. And then that way they have both the verbal record and a written record of your testimony as well. Some tips for preparing for your actual testimony. First of all, and I highlighted this because I think it's so important, make it personal. I think we all have a personal tie. If you look back at the slides that Mitch shared, the impact of soot has an impact from the womb to unborn children all the way up to older adults. And for me personally, I care about my kids, but also I care for my parents, and both of them have dementia, and I spend a lot of time wondering whether or not their environment influenced that, and whether or not I'm going to someday end up with dementia because of the chemicals that are in our air. So I will tell my personal story and talk about both my children and my parents, but it helps to have a personal story because, everybody comes in and shares data and that kind of thing, but your story can really stand out. And then you also want to talk about why we care. And Mitch has done a good job of talking about the science and the biblical reason behind it. And in the toolkit that we're going to send out, there is information in there about the impact of soot and all kinds of statistics and background that you can look into. Always be sure to include your faith perspective as pro-life evangelical Christians, we have a unique perspective that we can share, and we can tie it back to our faith, and that can have a big impact on the people that are listening, that care about, conservative voices and that kind of thing. And then also we want to include what the specific asks are. So make sure that you include in there, that we want the certain restrictions in there that Mitch had mentioned earlier. And then make sure you rely on the background information that will be in the toolkit that you'll receive. And then finally limit it to 5 minutes. They do cut you off. And so you start, they put a timer up when you start talking, and it is counting down. And if you go over the 5 minutes, they will cut you off. And it's important to get everything in that you want to say, especially since the end is typically the ask and a conclusion. So it's an important part. So I recommend making sure that you practice it ahead of time, and that way you know that you're within the time limit. And you can cut it shorter or add more to it if you have more or less time. In the toolkit, there is a personal testimony template that does walk through these things. And so starts with an introduction of who you are, goes into your story and why you care and how you're going to make it personal, the benefits that the strong standards would have, and you can rely on both the toolkit and Mitch's presentation for that, the ask, and so specifically what you want them to do, and we've laid that out for you. And then finally, a conclusion. So like I said, it really isn't that big of a lift to write. It's probably about 600 to 750 words. Practice it, and then to deliver it on the day. Some important tips. I've already said some of these things, but just want to reiterate. I thought they were important enough to set aside. So first of all, make sure that you can stay within the time. Take some time to practice it, and make sure, practice your timing and your pauses for dramatic effect and that kind of thing. And so practicing it can help you make sure that you're within the time zone. And then also make sure that if you don't use Zoom on a regular basis, make sure that you have it downloaded before the day of the testimony. You can also call in if you are having internet issues or anything of that sort that day. So that kind of concludes my presentation. So we'll open it up for questions, either about the how to testify and what to expect that day, or about the details of why we care about this rule. And you can either unmute yourself, or you can put your question in the chat. Jack, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Last time there was a 4-minute limit. Do we know this is 5?
We do. It's a different department within the EPA that is allowing testimony. So the standard that they've put out for this is 5 minutes. So
because they definitely are timing it. So I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, they definitely do time it. Yeah. Any other questions?
Just
Mitch?
if you could, if you can hear me, I was just going to ask Lindsay if she could throw up just, my letter or the sample letter in the chat to show you that all the facts and all the things are there, whatever you want to use in the personal stuff just as a guide. You can throw it up on screen share it. If not, that's okay, and we can do it later. But everybody should have it by now. I think Lindsay did put the toolkit in the chat.
Yeah, the toolkit is in the chat,
Yeah,
and
the
I did send out.
is in the toolkit.
Okay, good.
And just as a word, you can see the title, everything else there. This is going to be the official my response, so it does have a little bit of technical stuff in it, but I'm really stressing in my testimony, both later on, I have some personal stuff in there about York and Lancaster counties, about how we don't meet it and the amount of life. But for me, one of the things that I'm going to focus in on is the fact that if the WHO can set a standard of 5 micrograms per cubic meter, EPA should be able to do at least 8. And so I think that's really the important thing that we want to emphasize, is that we have to drive this down to below 9 micrograms per cubic meter, and that's just a number. So from, it is 12 now, but it needs to go to 8 to protect our kids. And so you can look at that at your leisure. I've been fighting this for a long time, and I am very passionate about it because of what it does to unborn children and the loss of life and everybody. I mean, it literally is, as far as air toxin goes, it is the most deadly in the United States and deadly around the world. So it's something we need to address, and I believe very strongly, for my faith calls me to protect the least of these, and for me, babies are the least of these. So other questions?
I just want to add to what Mitch just said. He mentioned that he's putting information in about his county. And so I'm sharing where you can find that information. The American Lung Association has the State of the Air report, and you can find the state of the air of your state or of your county. And some cities, like big enough cities, will include that information as well. So that would be a good place if you want to include personal information about the place that you live, which for a lot of people, if you live in a place that doesn't have great air, that would be good to include. I see
Eric, you had a
Eric's.
question? Eric?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was having a hard time getting off mute. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
We sure can.
Great, thanks. And thank you for this. I do want to say thank you to the effort here and the information that you're providing. Thank you for that. And it will be good to look at some of the research information too. I'm very much into evidence-based policy, so I think it's good to have that. I do want to ask though. So EEN's position is 8 micrograms per cubic meter, right? So are we representing that position only, or if we actually feel it should go to the WHO level of 5, are we okay to make that testimony?
I think we are. I mean, I'm being realistic in the political sense by saying that, you know, we believe that the minimum it should be is 8. That's the way I put it in my testimony. The minimum it should be 8. I would love to see it get lower than that, but I'm being realistic that from a jump to 12 to 5 probably isn't going to happen. So my recommendation is minimum of 8, and we should go stronger.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yep. Jack, I see you have another question.
Yes. So is there any other country or any references globally that they have a lower standard and how that's impacted their health in those countries? I'm thinking Europe, Canada would be more likely to be more stringent.
Yeah, I do not know what Canada is. The EU is more stringent. I believe they are planning to follow the WHO standard, but I can have to double check on that. But the research that's in there, that's referenced in my letter in particular, really does talk about how it drives down the health benefits for every 1 microgram you get down, the night of life saved. And so I'd urge you to take a look at that, and I can get back to you on the standards of what EU is at this moment in England and Canada. I can have that for you tomorrow sometime, and we'll modify the toolkit with that so everybody can access it.
Only if it's convenient. I'll certainly look at your references. I just thought it'd be
Certainly
good to quote some other countries that have had success in driving this.
Sure. And Jack, just for information, you know, the EPA Scientific Advisory Board actually recommended the 8 standard too. By and large, they have a real long paper, and EPA ignored it. I personally think they ignored it to some degree because they wanted the public comments to make sure they could back up their statement. But we can provide all that data to you if you like, but that's just, you know, unfortunately, I'm literally sitting in Washington, D.C. taking this call. I just came from a congressional hearing. But I would think that, you know, everything we do has a matter of trying to reach public opinion and making sure that there's a good political outcome.
No, I'm completely convinced that of the ask. I would just wanted to include references to, you know, if other countries have
Yep. So I'll get them for you, and we'll put them in the toolkit tomorrow.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mitch, there were a couple of questions in the chat. First is from Phil Covert, asking if there's a relationship between PM 2.5 and asthma. I'm not sure if you highlighted that in your presentation, so if you want to go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, Lindsay put a good link to it in the thing from EPA, but yes, asthma is one of the definite impacts. It's one of the cardiopulmonary things. Asthma is high on the list, one of those 9 causes, but yes, without a doubt. Even you saw that in the video about how asthma is exacerbated or particularly may even be caused from being forced to breathe PM 2.5 at high concentrations at an early age.
There's another one from Kath Smith. I quoted what I think was a statistic I got from an EEN presentation. 500,000 babies and 1.7 million children die annually and globally from air pollution. Is that still accurate information?
Yeah. That, I think I answered that one. I believe that's still very accurate. It actually may even be worse, so that's a minimum. Again, I just don't have the total recollection of all the numbers off the top of my head, but I can tell you that I know that at least 9 million people total die every year from air pollution, minimum around the world.
And Lindsay shared in the chat a link to, if you're not signed up for giving a testimony and now you think you want to do it, there is a link in the chat where you can go and submit an interest form for the different time slots that are available, and we'll look at that and match you with a time slot that we have available and get you all of the information. Just want to stress that it is exciting and might sound intimidating to testify before the EPA, but it really isn't that difficult to do, and I feel like the toolkit will help you prepare for that. So if you are available next week, Tuesday through Thursday, and you have time to prepare a testimony, it would be wonderful if you could give a oral testimony. And if you're not available, then we would encourage you to submit a written testimony, which we can help you submit as well. Eric, I see you have another question.
I do. Another quick question. Does EEN have any ideas or proposals as to the how-tos? I mean, how will we get to these levels of reductions? Is it mostly just focused on the reduced use of fossil fuels, or are there other diesel controls, transportation controls, anything like that EEN has considered?
Eric, it's all of the above, but certainly in the city environments, in those areas, one of the big things to do is the electrification of public transit. Major cities is one thing. Planting trees is another in cities and even in public areas, because actually trees, believe it or not, growing trees are one of the biggest ways to clean up PM 2.5. They just suck it in if you plant the right kind of trees. One of the reasons that Lancaster, the county next to me, has so much 2.5 is they have no trees. I mean, they're down because of farmland and building to about 13% of the whole county only has trees on it. And they are a major truck route and a major railroad route. And so they have all this transportation inspired PM 2.5. So actually working with some controls on trucks, you may have noticed that earlier this year, EPA did come out with some new pollution limiting things for heavy duty trucks. Which is pretty cool. In fact, when they unveiled the rule, they had, for my benefit, was kind of fun, an electric garbage truck that was made in Pennsylvania, which I thought was really cool. So I think how we change fuels and we limit technology and we become more electrified is one of the easiest ways to do it. And of course, in the short term, as I mentioned, the planting of trees is just exceptional, whether you're in a country setting or in an urban setting.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you, Mitch. I appreciate that. I'm out here in California, and of course, wildfire is a huge contributor to PM 2.5 in our state. And there was a proposition in the recent election that was designed to help with the electrification and even provide electrical vehicles to more impoverished areas, underserved areas, but included in that was also a wildfire control aspect, because there was the feeling that along with the electrification, if we don't control wildfires well, then we will continue to have the PM 2.5 issues. Unfortunately, the bill didn't pass, the proposition didn't pass, but I mean, that all comes into play too, as well, right? Wildfire and all others.
Absolutely. In fact, we're not a big proponent of major changes in NEPA, which is how regulations are enforced and how they're done for projects, including forest management. But Scott Peters, who's a representative from California last year, to try to get it in the end-of-year budget called the Save Our Sequoias Act to really address some of those areas with the sequoias and the forest fires. And they did have some what I would say were common sense NEPA reforms, so you could get in and do manage the forest a little better to clean up some of the underbrush that's really helping exacerbating the fires once they get going. I mean, sure, we want to have underbrush. We would like it to naturally decompose. But when we get to fire season and these hot temperatures and drought, it's just the kindle that makes it even so much worse. So I think there's a lot of things we can do and are readily available. We just have to have the will to do it. And all of us can do our part. And I think that's what's so exciting about this as a Christian, is that each of us can do something. We can, California has interesting ways of cutting your grass with electric mowers, or just simply cutting back, using public transportation. There are a lot of ways that we can act together to stop PM2.5.
So I saw that Phil Cover in the chat mentioned if there was any evidence about a connection with autism.
And the answer is yes. It is probably one of those things, as we mentioned, that the PM2.5, if you watch that little video that we took earlier, is definitely responsible and has some impact on developmental disabilities, without a doubt. And there's no doubt that is one of that we talk about all the time, is that certainly PM2.5 is one of those link causes, along with the use of petrochemicals, especially fertilizers that become airborne. But I guess I think we're about ready to end, if that's correct. But before we do, I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for coming on board. And for me, this really is a Christian issue. It's preserving life. It's preserving God's creation. It's all of the above, and it will help create even new jobs as we switch fuels and move forward to the future. But I was going to impose if Phil could come off of mute for a second, and then I'll turn it back to Kim for final close us out. But I was wondering if Phil, if you would be willing to pray for the group, which we failed to do before we started this.
Oh, I certainly would, Mitch. And I've been quiet because I just want to drink in all of this as much as I can, because like you, I am just passionate about this. I've got 4 grandchildren that are affected with autism and asthma. And I watch their lives and the way it has been affected. And I just think about how this is just multiplying by millions of children, as you have said, around the world. And I'm just appalled by this. And so anything that I can do, we can do to help lower this death rate is just critical to creation and to life itself. So thank you for this. Thank you so much. And if we could, I'm sorry that my camera is not working, so I have to get a new one before next week. But if we could pray, and I thank you, Lord, for your creation. It is so incredibly beautiful. It is amazing, the intricacies, the way it works together. And we confess, Lord, that we have not dealt well with your creation. And we are now realizing the people here on this call and people around the world that are connected to creation care and those in EEN, we just thank you for their passion for your world as we try to clean up the mess that has been made over the centuries. And we ask the Lord that through these presentations this next week before the EPA, that those that will be hearing it may hear it with the intent to making changes that will preserve life. Preserve life, Lord, is so important because it is the gift that you have given to each and every one of us. Thank you so much, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you all for attending and for your interest in submitting either written or oral testimony before the EPA next week. And just to reiterate, it is important and, it has a big impact, but for not that great of a lift. So we'd love it if you haven't already signed up, if you would use that form to go ahead and sign up, and we'll get you a time. And then if you're not available, feel free to reach out and we can help you submit written comments as well. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.